It was the beginning of my second year in the seminary. I had recently returned from my clinical pastoral education, and I moved back into the apartment that I shared with my wife. One day, as we were leaving the apartment to run some errands, as we came down the stairs and around the corner, we saw that there was a young couple moving into the apartment directly below ours. The hall was filled with boxes, a U-Haul truck was parked outside, and so Jody and I poked our head inside the apartment. It was then that we met for the first time some folks that would become longtime friends. A gentleman named Festo Mutashobia. He was from Tanzania. He was moving into the apartment with his wife, Priska. As you might imagine, their apartment was just littered with boxes. Half of them were ripped open as they were trying to find homes for some of their belongings. Others were just piled in the corner. Jody and I poked our heads in and we said hi. What happened afterwards surprised us a bit, made me feel, I must admit, a little bit uncomfortable. Festo, having cast eyes on us for the very first time in his life, was beaming with a great smile, and he invited us in. He said something to his wife in his native language, whatever it was, I don't know, but she began rooting through a box. Festo moved boxes off of a chair and gave us a place to sit. And in short order, Priska showed up in the living room with a single plate and 2 glasses of water. She gave a glass to me, a glass to Jody, and on a packing crate set between the 2 chairs, she placed a small plate with 2 slices of white bread. What my wife and I had just experienced was a level of welcome and hospitality that, well, was uncharacteristic of our American culture. We were on a mission. Jody and I were on our way someplace. We hadn't planned on visiting, and certainly on moving in day, we figured we would just wave, say hi, introduce ourselves, maybe come back a bit later and get to know folks, maybe invite them upstairs for dinner. But no, we were to sit down, to eat that slice of bread, to enjoy that water, because that was hospitality. That was hospitality and welcome deeply rooted in the culture from which Festo and Priska came. We had experienced, almost in an embarrassing way, welcome. 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 Come and be well. That's what Festo and Priska were communicating to us. It is part of our culture. It is part of who we are. Come, be well. Experience our hospitality. You know, for the ancient Jews and Christians, hospitality and welcome was very much a part of who they were. Welcoming the stranger is deeply rooted in the Torah. For the Hebrews knew that their ancestors were wanderers. They were nomads. They were people without a permanent home, and they moved from place to place, oftentimes relying upon the hospitality and the welcome of others. That welcome of a stranger was rooted in their tradition and culture. That welcoming of a stranger was part and parcel of their faithfulness to God. And so it was in Old Testament times, and so it was in the time of Jesus. You remember the story of the woman at the well? the encounter with Jesus, as they were talking back and forth, the community well was an important place. If you lived in the ancient Near East at that time, if you were a traveler who was passing through that region, if you were a nomad, if you were an itinerant preacher and prophet, when you entered a town, you went to the well. Travelers waited at the well, and the townsfolk would come. They would see you there and make certain that your thirst was quenched, and if you hungered or needed for anything, the townspeople took you in as a stranger and took you home. It was grace. It was generosity that allowed that welcome to take place. Come and be well. Deep down inside, the way that we're wired, we all need that kind of hospitality and welcome. The need for that is constant. Living Waters has this wonderful banner that reflects the constancy of that need. Whoever you are, wherever you find yourself in your journey of faith, know that you are most welcome here to receive the richness of God's love given for you. We need hospitality and welcome. That need is constant. But so is the fear of the stranger. Hospitality, not fear, however, defines who people are. Hospitality and welcome, not fear, defines the character of the individual and says something about the value of the guest. You see, in Matthew's community measured faithfulness and love and the value of people by the hospitality that was given and that was received. We struggle with those same issues even today. Those are hot-button issues for us in this nation, in our world, in our very lives. Black lives matter. We need immigration reform. How do we treat Black Americans? How do we treat indigenous people? How do we treat immigrants and wanderers and people on their journey when they enter our country? The way in which we respond through welcome or fear says something about our relationship with God, our understanding of what grace is. And it says something deep and profound about the value of the stranger we have encountered. Putting together a welcoming culture, reflecting that kind of character of hospitality, does not just happen. There maybe aren't any real random acts of kindness. It's just people kind of hardwired to be kind, to be generous, to be filled with grace. I served a church in Jersey City, and they put in their bulletin and on the sign out in front, they put in there that all were welcome. Well, I challenged them on that one day. I said, you know, there's a young boy across the street who maybe once every 6 weeks comes to church with us. His mom, on occasion, brought him to worship. He didn't come all the time because that young man was in a wheelchair. We had many steps to get him upstairs, up to where the sanctuary was. And so the church decided, if we're going to stand by the words that say all are welcome, we needed to do something. And so they built a ramp. We built a ramp that left from the parking lot into the fellowship hall, and then through the sacristy, you would be able to enter the sanctuary and to join us for worship. And so with that intentionality, they went out to create a welcoming ramp. They went out ahead of themselves in order to be hospitable. And they thought they had it accomplished. They had finally reached that moment. And we discovered that the doors were too narrow for the wheelchair to fit through. And once again, there was an obstacle, an unintentional barrier that separated that young man from the place where we proclaimed the gospel. The stranger, the guest, the host. All these words are intertangled. As a matter of fact, even in Greek, they're interrelated. The stranger, xenos in Greek, gives us the word xenophobia, the fear of the stranger, the person who's not like me. But there's another word in Greek, xenophilia, love of the stranger. Love of the stranger is the same word that they use for guest. It's the same word that is used for host. Grace, not fear, grace, flips that around so that it becomes about the love of the stranger who is our guest. Hospitality brings who you are, what you have, what we honor to the guest. The gospel story talks about giving a cup of water to the least of these. The least, the lost, the last. A cup of water. If you do that, you keep your reward. Your reward, of course, is a life filled with grace. But how can such a simple thing make a difference? The power maybe is in the symbol of the water. Oh, we can track that back to our baptism, but there's more to it than that. You ever been to one of those Catholic or Episcopal churches where in the middle of the Holy Communion celebration, they take a little bit of water and they mix it with the wine? You ever wonder what that's about? Well, actually, it was a practice that was begun a long, long time ago because the wine wasn't so good. It was thick, it was cloudy, and if you watered it down a little bit, it tasted better. As winemaking skills improved, they didn't need to water that down anymore, and so they were looking for symbolic reasons why they might do that. Oh, maybe we do that because when Jesus was dying on the cross, they stabbed him with a spear, and water and blood came out. But there's also a stewardship symbolism that was associated with this. You see, at the time of the Eucharist in the ancient church, people brought their gifts. They brought food, mostly. Didn't have a lot of money, but they brought wine, they brought bread, they brought meat, they brought things from the garden. They used that food to take care of the orphans, to feed the widows, and to feed those people who were imprisoned. Because you see, the Romans, when they imprisoned you, they didn't feed you, they just incarcerated you. And so all that stuff in the Bible about visiting me when I was in prison is really important. Because if somebody doesn't bring you a drink of water and a bologna sandwich, you were in real trouble. Everyone was to participate in the offering. If you were the poorest in the village, your gift was water. Because you had access to the well, and the water was life-giving. No one was off the hook. Everyone was required or expected to be a person of welcome and hospitality. And even the most paltry gift of water reflected and showed the value of the guest who would receive it. So may God open our eyes, open our ears, our hands, our hearts, indeed our lives to the strangers among us, so that we might welcome all in Jesus' name. For such lives as this, thanks be to God. Amen.